Hey everyone! Tonight, we're not diving into royal scandals or epic battles. We're going underground into the dirt-floored homes, into the aching bones and calloused hands of the people who never wrote the histories, but lived through every awful, muddy, shivering year of them. This is a story about survival, not the glorious kind. The quiet, itchy, smoke-stained, rot under your fingernails kind. The kind of survival that doesn't win glory, but does win another day. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy slow, strange history that puts you to sleep in the best way possible. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's drifting off alongside me around the world. Now settle in. Light a candle if you're feeling medieval. And let's gently descend into the ordinary, brutal brilliance of how medieval peasants stayed alive despite everything trying to kill them. First, imagine your entire house could fit inside a modern garage. That's your whole life: walls made from woven sticks daubed with mud, a roof that leaks straw in the rain, and a bed that's really just a wooden board with a sack of flattened straw. If you're lucky, the pig sleeps outside. But most nights, it's under the table, snoring beside your brother. You don't own the land. You don't own the house, really. You are a villainous semi-free peasant who technically belongs to the manor. The Lord owns everything. The chickens, his. The wheat, his. The pig under your table, his too. Technically, though, no one says that out loud. You wake before sunrise, not with an alarm clock, but because your bladder and the rooster have both conspired against you. There's no glass window, just a wooden shutter you can crack. Open to check the sky. Cold. Gray. Always gray. Your day begins with bread. Not soft, crusty bakery bread. Hard bread. Dense as roof tile. It's made from barley or rye, sometimes mixed with beans or acorns when the grain runs low. You dip it in ale, not because you're a heavy drinker, but because the water isn't safe to drink unless it's been boiled. Ale is your hydration strategy. Then you walk. You walk to the field you owe labor to, not your field his. You plow his land first. You weed his gardens. You repair his fences. Only after your obligations are met can you tend to your own. Miserable plot. And if the harvest is bad, he still takes his share. Now let's talk about famine. It happened more often than not. 1 bad year, you tighten your belt. 2 bad years, you start mixing sawdust into the flour. 3, you dig up roots and pray they aren't poisonous. If it gets really bad, and there were times it did, you quietly eat the seed grain you were supposed to plant next season. It's a death loan you hope to repay with a miracle. There's no relief fund, no soup kitchen. The church might hand out some thin gruel, but most people survive on nettles, foraged berries, and the occasional bone broth that's been boiled. So many times it tastes more like wood than meat, but somehow, most survive, at least enough to repopulate the village. Women often give birth 10 or 12 times, knowing only a few of the children will make it past infancy. No one names a baby until it's laughed at least once. Naming too soon is considered bad luck. Then come the plagues, not just the Black Death, though that was the showstopper, killing nearly half the population of Europe in just a few short years. But also the sweating sickness, the ague, the bloody flux, the kind of coughs that never left, and the mysterious pustules that appeared and vanished like warnings. You don't have a doctor. If you're lucky, there's a midwife or a local cunning woman who knows which herbs to use. Feverfew for the aches, valerian for sleep, yarrow for wounds. If those fail, you bleed, you pray, you die. The dead aren't buried with ceremony. There are too many. Shallow graves fill fast. Sometimes lime is poured over bodies to keep the rot from spreading. Families mark graves with stones, or don't mark them at all, too numb to remember who lies where. Still, life continues. Children play between the graves. The well still needs digging. Sheep still need shearing. The Lord still expects his taxes, even when your house smells like loss. Asterisk, speaking of the Lord, he's a permanent problem. He decides when you can marry, who can graze animals where, and how much grain you owe for the privilege of staying alive on his land. If you break a rule, a fine. If your pig escapes and tramples his barley, a bigger fine. If you gather firewood from the wrong tree, that might cost you a day in the stocks. Asterisk, justice is swift, local, and extremely biased. The reeve your village. Enforcer is usually a peasant too, but one who's learned it's safer to favor the manor. Trials are public, but not always fair. People steal. People accuse each other of stealing. Sometimes someone disappears, and the priest says nothing, because he's seen too much. Asterisk, but not all lords are monsters. Some are indifferent. Some give a small feast at Christmas or waive debts after a harsh winter. These small mercies are spoken of with awe for years. He let us keep the goat after the blizzard of '68. That's the closest thing you'll ever hear to a legend in your village. Asterisk, marriage isn't about romance. It's a contract. If you're a woman, your father arranges it. If you're a man, you save up for years to afford the token required to win permission from your lord. Dowries are rare. Most peasants offer a piglet or a sack of barley or labor. In exchange, love might happen after, or it might not. Most marriages are partnerships in survival. If she can thresh and bear children, she's a good wife. If he doesn't beat you too often and brings home firewood, he's a good husband. Asterisk, and yet, joy exists. It sneaks in when no one's watching. During midsummer festivals, you eat too much, dance until your knees ache, and forget for one night that your boots have holes. At harvest, there's music, wooden flutes, tambourines made from stretched pig skin, songs that rhyme moon with spoon, no matter the century. Children chase chickens. The old woman who mutters at the woods brings you herbs that actually help. Someone makes a joke about the reeve's nose, and nobody reports it. You sit by a fire with warm bread in your hand and think, for a moment, this isn't so bad. Asterisk, so how did they survive? They didn't. Not always. But when they did, it wasn't through strength or strategy. It was stubbornness. It was routine. It was family and faith and the quiet decision, made again and again, to get up and try one more day. Asterisk, because plagues kill. Famine kills, lords tax, rain rots, roofs fall, children die. But there's a sheep that needs shearing. There's grain that might sprout. There's bread to be baked, even if it's made from last season's hopes and this season's bark. And, in the absence of triumph, there is simply this: survival. Asterisk, inside your home, there's always smoke. It curls up from the hearth, from the rushlight, from the hole in the thatch roof that pretends to be a chimney. Your eyes sting. Your clothes stink. Everything smells like damp wool and ash. You get used to it or you don't. Some people just cough for 20 years and call it living. Asterisk, there's no such thing as privacy. Your parents sleep in the same room where your siblings are born and your grandmother died. Curtains are rare. Personal space is more of a theory than a feature. If you want to be alone, you go outside and pretend to fetch water. Asterisk, you know everyone's business. You know who sharpened their sickle last, who's missing a hen, who got caught in the woods with the reeve's daughter. But gossip isn't just entertainment, it's survival. If you know who's falling behind, you know who might ask you for grain, or blame you for the grain they lost, or offer you something desperate in trade. Asterisk, you watch your words, especially around feast days or during tithes or after a poor harvest. You've seen what happens when accusations stick. Someone's bread turns moldy. Someone's child takes sick. The priest calls it God's will, but you remember the glance your neighbor gave you over the well bucket. Asterisk, your food is Humble. It starts with pottage, a stew that lives in a pot and never fully empties. You add to it daily turnips, leeks, oats, stale bread, sometimes salted meat if you're lucky. You eat what's in season. Apples in autumn, dried peas in winter. Sorrel in spring. In times of scarcity, you get creative. Bark flour, boiled nettles, goosegrass roots. You don't eat for taste. You eat for staying upright. A good day is when your stomach doesn't groan louder than the church bell. Salt is precious. Butter is rare. And anything sweet is a miracle, usually honey, if you can keep the bees happy and the bears away. Some villages keep a communal hive. You don't touch it without permission. Someone once did. He left the village, or was taken. The story changes depending on who's telling it. You know the rhythms of the year better than your own heartbeat. Spring means mud and aching backs. Lambing season, hopes planted, literally. You pray for no frost. You pray harder when the clouds roll in too fast. Summer is everything. All hands in the field, sweat, cuts, rain, bending until your spine remembers its own angles. Weddings happen. Here, in the sliver of warmth and hope, so do births. And fights. Too much sun and too little bread make tempers high. Autumn is fear. Will it be enough? Can you stretch the grain until March? You count the sacks. Twice, you watch for rats. You listen to the wind. Winter is waiting. Burning dung bricks. Digging into stores you tried not to touch. Swapping old stories and sharpening blades. You make shoes from scraps. You patch holes with sinew. And if someone dies, you thank them quietly for leaving their portion behind. The church is the center of life and the ceiling of your hope. It tells you who you are, why you're here, and what will happen when this rough, bitter life is done. The priest speaks in Latin. You don't understand the words, but you understand. The rhythm. Stand, kneel, pray, repeat. You go to confession because everyone else does. You tithe because you have to. You kneel not because you believe, but because belief is safer than doubt. Still, faith offers comfort. Saints protect your goats. Holy days give you a break from labor. You mark time by feast days, not months. You know when it's St. Cuthbert's Day, but not what year it is. No one does. You live in the now, and the now is ruled by the weather, and the Lord, and the hunger, and the hope that you're not being punished for something you forgot to confess. And what about justice? There's no police, no appeals, only fines, stocks, whippings. And sometimes, the ducking stool for women who gossip, or talk too much, or speak out of turn. Men can challenge each other to trial by combat. Women cannot. If you're accused of theft, you must prove your innocence with an oath, or by bringing people who swear you'd never do such a thing. If no one swears for you, you pay. Or you bleed. The manor court is held in a cold hall with no chairs. You stand, you speak when spoken to. The bailiff keeps the records. You don't get a copy, but you learn. You learn never to leave your tools in the open. You learn never to take from the forest without checking who's watching. You learn to keep secrets, especially about what grows in the hedgerow and who visits whom after dark. Children grow fast. Too fast. By 7, they're useful. By 12, they're essential. They carry water, shoo birds from the fields, twist cords, gather kindling. Learn to spin. Boys learn to plow. Everyone learns to endure. Childhood is not protection, it's preparation. By 14, you're thinking about marriage. Or at least your parents are. Love comes later, if ever. Your partner is chosen for the land they bring, the animals they own, or the way their family stood firm during last year's frost. Yet despite everything, plague, pain, lords, taxes, hunger, grief, life isn't joyless. There's laughter in the alehouse, crude jokes by the tannery, whispered stories by firelight that scare you in a way that feels good. You don't own much, but you own your time when the work is done. You make riddles. You carve your initials in the barn wall. You trace symbols on the soles of your shoes for luck. You find meaning in pattern, in the way birds migrate, in the way your neighbor braids her hair, in how many times the priest pauses before the amen. You carry your dead. You remember them. You give your children their names. You endure. And maybe that's the miracle. Not that they lived long or well, but that they lived at all. In a world designed to grind them into the soil, they managed to rise every morning, draw breath, and do what needed to be done. Again and again. It wasn't glorious. It wasn't heroic, but it was survival. And for the medieval peasant, survival was a rebellion in slow motion. Asterisk. The deeper you go into peasant life, the clearer it becomes. Nothing is wasted. Not time, not thread, not even bones. Your tools aren't factory made or bought from town. They're improvised. A pig's rib can be sharpened into a knitting needle. A goose quill writes your prayers, if you can write. You might not own a knife, but you've carved one from ashwood that works well enough for slicing bark and gutting fish. Asterisk. Your boots are patched until they're more thread than leather. Your tunic is handed down, altered, redyed, worn backward. When the front wears out, when a linen shift finally gives up, it becomes a rag. When the rag frays, it's stuffing. Nothing goes to waste. Even ashes from the hearth are used to make lye for soap. Asterisk. That ingenuity isn't just born from poverty, it's inherited knowledge. Everything you know about living came from someone older. Your grandmother taught you where the edible mushrooms hide, which leaves to chew for fever, and how to tie your cloak to keep out the wind. Asterisk. You didn't learn from a book. You learned from repetition, from doing, from watching your mother's hands, from listening to your father curse the plowshare and whisper apologies to the earth. Asterisk. And then there's the forest. It's not yours. It's the Lord's. Everything. In it, wood, game, mushrooms, berries is his property. But you take anyway, quietly, carefully. There are rules. Not written, but known. Hedge laws, they're sometimes called. Not laws of the land, but laws of the in-between. You can take kindling, but not logs. Berries, but not bark. A snare trap for rabbits is acceptable, if no one sees it. Chopping down a young sapling? Never. That's an offense with a fine or worse loss. Of grazing rights. Asterisk. But every village has one person who knows the forest's moods. The one who speaks of it like it's alive. Usually an older woman. Sometimes a man with a limp and eyes like river stones. They don't wear symbols. They don't claim power. But you listen when they say not to walk the south path on a new moon. Asterisk. Because hedge laws aren't just about trees. They're about balance. You take, but you also give. A bit of bread left at the base of a beach. A small braid of rushes tied where the deer drink. You don't speak of it, you just do it. Like your parents did. Asterisk. When you're sick in prayer hasn't helped, you go to the midwife or the old widow who knows the herbs. They give you wormwood for worms, mugwort for labor pains, a mixture of wine and violet to soften your breath if you cough too hard. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't, but you always feel better when they touch your forehead and hum. It's not healing in the sense the Lord's physician might write in the ledger, but it's care. And care is medicine too. Asterisk. If the sickness takes you, you're buried with little ceremony, no carved stone. Maybe a cross made from 2 sticks tied with rush. But someone remembers you. Your name gets spoken at the hearth for a few weeks. Then a few years. Then not at all. But the tools you made might be used again. Your field still bears your footprints in the pattern of the furrows. Your song still gets hummed by the children. That's the closest thing you'll have to a legacy, and it's enough. Asterisk. The peasant isn't powerless. They just hold power differently. They decide when to help, when to hide, when to lie for someone who needs protecting. They know the priest sins. the Reeves' real father. They remember who gave grain during the lean years, and who locked their storehouse and pretended not to hear knocking. And they remember. It's a slow power, a patient one. The kind that builds not kingdoms, but resilience. When rebellion comes, and sometimes it does, it never starts with swords. It starts with whispers. With a shared look when the Lord's tax collector walks past. With a cow not milked until morning. With 10 families, separately and without agreement, choosing not to send their eldest sons to the manor fields that day. They know it won't last. They know punishment will follow. But they do it anyway. Because silence is also a weapon. Despite the hardships, there are rituals for joy. Maypoles, midsummer bonfires, epiphany bread. You gather wildflowers not for beauty, but for blessing. You wear them to keep evil away. You laugh around the fire, not because everything is fine, but because you know it isn't, and laughter still feels good in your chest. When someone marries, you weave garlands. You scrub the house with lavender. You sing songs about harvest and honey and husbands who don't snore. When someone dies, you gather their tools and hang them on a wall. You light a candle. You sit with the silence they leave behind. You pass on their bread recipe and the way they always tied their apron just once around. Never twice. And life goes on. Medieval peasants didn't leave grand castles or gilded tombs. They left grooves in the land from their plows. Burn marks on wooden bowls from years of soup. Scratches in the walls where their children measured how tall they were getting. They survived not because they had power, but because they shared it. One loaf, one cloak, one story passed down to explain why the well should never be approached after sundown. They made meaning out of mud. And for hundreds of years, against disease, war, cold, cruelty, and hunger, they kept doing the most astonishing thing anyone can do. They stayed. The buttons that broke a guild. How one woman's tunic unraveled an industry. In 1622, Amsterdam was a city growing faster than its shoemakers could cut leather. Every canal reflected both grandeur and grime. Merchant wealth floated by on polished barges while street boys waded barefoot through ditches lined with rotting cabbage leaves. Guilds ruled the trades, and trades ruled everyone else. On Spoestraat, down a narrow lane where laundry lines tangled above the alleys like spider webs, lived a woman named Elske van der Meulen. She stitched tunics, not for merchants, not for aristocrats. For the working poor, the apprentice bakers, the night watchmen, the widows who boiled potatoes 3 times before the pot cracked. Elske's hands were quick, her eyesight sharp, and her prices were almost suspiciously fair. She worked alone, kept to herself, and was known for one particular oddity. She refused to use wooden buttons. At the time, buttons weren't just fasteners, they were territory. The Amsterdam button makers. Guild controlled who could make them, what they could be made from, and which garments required them. Their rules ran longer than most church sermons. Violating them was not just a breach of etiquette, it was economic heresy. Buttons could only be made of approved materials. Brass, bone, fine wood. Not horn, not pewter, not hand-cast ceramic. And certainly not by a woman without guild approval. But Elske didn't care. She made her buttons from river clay. She shaped them with her fingertips, dried them over the stove, and painted them with boiled bark and soot. Then she stitched them onto tunics for clients who couldn't afford official tailors. They weren't beautiful, but they held. They closed what needed closing. And that, to most people, was enough. The trouble began when one of her tunics ended up in church. Merchant's clerk, whose name is lost to time, but whose waist measurements were recorded for tailoring purposes, wore it beneath his overcoat on a rainy Sunday. When he removed the coat and knelt, one of Elske's buttons caught the light just enough to be noticed by the wrong person, a guild inspector. Within a week, she had a fine posted on her door. 8 guilders for unauthorized use of non-sanctioned fasteners. Elsk, he didn't pay. Asterisk, she didn't argue either. She simply kept sewing, kept molding her buttons, kept baking them in the heat of her small kitchen stove. 3 weeks later, another fine, then a summons, then a visit. They expected defiance. What they got was worse, indifference. Asterisk, according to the court records kept on brittle parchment and filed under minor civic disturbances. Elsk was calm, direct, and not disposed to apology. When asked why she continued to use illegal buttons, she answered, "Because they work, and because they're mine." The guild wasn't amused. They seized one of her tunics as evidence. She made 2 more that night. They threatened to close her. Stall. She moved her operation to the rear of a bakery. They warned her that repeat offenses would result in harsher punishment. She told them buttons couldn't be monopolized. "They aren't coins," she said. "They keep things together." Asterisk, but the guild had more to lose than pride. If one seamstress could ignore their rules and survive, others might follow. What they didn't expect was how many already were. Asterisk, within a month, at least 6 other women had adopted Elsk's clay button method. Not out of rebellion, but out of need. It was cheaper, faster, independent. By winter, children were wearing coats fastened with twisted bark toggles and riverstone clasps. Shoemakers were threading knotted hemp loops. Housewives were boiling linen, stiff, and sewing it into discs. Elsk didn't start a movement. She survived one. The guild, however, declared it unauthorized innovation, and that made it dangerous. Asterisk, Elsk never claimed to be a leader, but the streets started treating her like one. Mothers sent their daughters to her door with bundles of old linen and questions about shaping clay. Bakers' wives left scraps of dyed cloth under her window with thank you notes drawn in chalk. She never asked for recognition. She never charged for patterns. But word spread. Soon she wasn't just making tunics. She was teaching others how to make their own, how to pierce hardened bread crusts to form closures, how to dry root paste into stiff beads, how to rub wax into loops so they wouldn't fray. It wasn't rebellion, not at first. Just utility. Just tired hands finding faster ways to hold clothes together, but the guild took it personally. Asterisk, they accused her of undercutting prices, diluting standards, spreading button heresy. One magistrate, in a meeting not meant for public ears, was quoted as saying, "If this goes on, we won't just lose buttons, we'll lose control." And that was the real fear. Asterisk, so they escalated. In March, Elsk's wares were confiscated. 34 tunics, dozens of handmade buttons, even her cooking tools, on suspicion they were used in unauthorized crafting. She wasn't arrested. That would have made her a martyr. Instead, they hit her with silence. Merchants were told not to buy from her. Carts refused to deliver cloth to her address. Apprentices who visited her workshop were fined. She became, in legal language, unendorsed. But being unendorsed made her more visible. When her front door was painted with an X, neighbors scrubbed it clean by morning. When her fines were raised to 20 guilders, someone left 2 silver coins on her doorstep in a bread wrapper. When a guild member accused her of sedition, 3 elderly women arrived at her defense, uninvited, one armed with a knitting needle, the others with alibis. The guild had rules. Elsk had loyalty. Asterisk, in the spring of 1623, the city council was forced to step in, not because they sympathized, but because the issue had grown expensive. Complaints, disruptions, declining tax, revenue from guild-certified sellers. So they sent a mediator, a man named Peter Holtz, known for ending disputes with careful language and plenty of wine. He visited Elsk's home twice. On the 3rd visit, he found her shaping a row of damp clay discs, humming to herself. "Do you ever wish you'd done things differently?" he asked. She replied, "Buttons aren't the problem. It's that they think they get to decide who's allowed to make them." He didn't argue. He asked her to make one for him. She handed him a square one, oddly shaped, but polished smooth. "Won't fit anything I wear," he said. Elske only shrugged. "Then change what you wear." The council reached a compromise. Elske would be allowed to continue producing buttons if she joined the guild. Paid the dues. Agreed to certain standards. She refused. Then, quietly, she counteroffered. Let her remain independent, but allow others to apply for non-guild status, a category for small local makers who served underserved clients. It was a legal backdoor, a loophole. And it worked. Within months, dozens of seamstresses, shoemakers, and weavers petitioned for non-guild status. Some still paid guild taxes. Others bartered with services. But the monopoly was cracked. Not broken. Not shattered. But cracked enough for the light to get in. Elske never became rich. She kept her one-room workshop until the day she died. She never published her patterns or wrote a manifesto, but years later, in a dusty guild ledger under addenda and exceptions, one line appears: river fasten method permitted in non-commercial garments, as practiced by Elske VD Milan 162223. No statue was raised. No portrait hung. But for decades, children in the alleys of Amsterdam wore coats fastened with clay, with linen knots, with bark loops, and no one fined them for it. Elske van der Meulen died in the winter of 1640. She passed quietly, with no children, no formal apprentices, and no wealth. Her death was recorded in the city ledger with 6 words: seamstress, age unknown, found in sleep. They say the baker's wife found her, having come to deliver day-old bread. The stove was cold. The workshop silent. Her tools arranged neatly beside her on the table, and beside her right hand, a small clay button, half finished, unpainted, still damp. She was buried in a shared grave with 3 other women. No marker, but someone, perhaps the baker's wife. Perhaps a child who remembered her tunics left a thread-wrapped bundle of buttons beside the burial mound. 5 of them, each shaped differently, each imperfect, none of them approved by the guild. In the years that followed, the Button Makers Guild never fully recovered its dominance. It still existed and still regulated trade among formal tailors, but the grip had loosened. The river fasten exemption that Elske had fought for quietly spread to other trades. A soap maker in Haarlem used it to bypass lye taxes. A cap maker in Leiden cited it to use undyed felt. By 1653, over 70 independent tradeswomen across the Low Countries were listed as non-guild approved under river fasten exception. Elske's name was never spoken at council meetings, but her method was cited in tax forms, contracts, and merchant disputes. She had become, quietly, policy. What's remarkable is that no single piece of her work survives. Not one of her tunics is in a museum. None of her buttons were kept in guild collections. Her home was long since torn down, replaced by a grocer's stall, and later, a printing shop. And yet her presence lingered. Travelers through Amsterdam noted the peculiar fastenings on children's coats. Market women used buttons shaped like pebbles or hammered bone. Housewives passed down shaping techniques with flour paste and fireplace ash. No one called it rebellion anymore. They called it making do. And if you asked where the method came from, the answer was often vague. My grandmother knew. The neighbor taught me. It's just how we do it. That's the nature of quiet revolutions. They dissolve into routine, into memory, into muscle. In 1708, during a clerical review of city ordinances, a magistrate named Willem Bosch stumbled across Elske's file. He marked the folder, archival, no action required. But he made a note in the margin, would have liked to meet her. She seemed sharp. Bosch, it turned out, had a granddaughter who made buttons from dyed paper pulp. He never stopped her. By the 19th century, Industrial buttons had replaced nearly every handmade fastener in the Netherlands. Factories stamped brass, molded glass, dyed bakelite. The guilds, long since dissolved, had been replaced by unions and factory boards. But in one corner of a folk museum in Haarlem, there is a small, overlooked display. A handful of lopsided clay buttons. No date, no plaque. Just a handwritten tag. Found in a canal house wall. Believed to be 17th century. Possibly decorative. They aren't decorative. They're Elsk's, asterisk. Or someone like her. Someone who needed a way to close a coat with whatever her hands could shape. Asterisk. What makes Elsk's story remarkable isn't that she broke the rules. It's that she did it without shouting, without banners, without asking for permission. She saw a system that served the powerful and left everyone else cold. An half-clothed dot, and she quietly offered an alternative. Not with speeches, but with buttons. Clay ones. Misshapen ones. Ones no merchant would ever wear, but ones that held. Held sleeves shut, held collars high, held dignity where a seam might have otherwise torn. Asterisk. So if you ever fasten something you made yourself, if you choose usefulness over perfection, if you mend instead of throw away, you're part of her story, even if you don't know it. Asterisk. The woman who taught sheep to dance, 1743. Yorkshire. In the hills of North Yorkshire, where mist hugged the stone fences tighter than any farmer ever could, lived a widow named Bryony Marsh. She owned nothing of significance, no land titles, no wealth, no known relations. Just 12 sheep and a one-room croft with a leaky thatch and a warped pine door that shrieked each time the wind changed direction. Asterisk. Bryony's sheep were odd. Not in their wool, which was coarse and matted like most Dale sheep. Not in their gait, which was slow and stubborn as expected, but in what they did when the fiddle played. Asterisk. It began. People said, one October dusk, Bryony had taken in a traveling fiddler for the night, offering him carrot stew and floor space in exchange for a tune. The next morning, as he packed his things, he played one last reel. A hornpipe, sprightly, sharp dot, and as the bow scraped across the strings, Bryony's sheep began to move. Asterisk. Not scatter. Not run. Move. 2 step forward in time with the beat. Another lifted a hoof in what could only be described as a rhythmic skip. The largest ram, named Cullen, after her late husband bucked twice, turned, and landed squarely on beat. Asterisk. Word spread, as it always does when animals behave suspiciously, like people. By month's end, the constable had walked up from the village of Cray to investigate. He found Bryony seated on a rock, humming. Her sheep milled about nearby, grazing. Nothing unusual. Until she clapped. Once, twice, then a third time, and the sheep arranged themselves into a crescent, like dancers waiting for their cue. Asterisk. No law prohibited sheep choreography, but no law had ever needed to. So Bryony was left alone. Mostly, she was asked to demonstrate at the harvest fair. She declined. She was offered coin from a traveling showman to take her sheep on tour. She declined that too. What she didn't decline was curiosity. She began to experiment, clapping patterns. Whistle tones, fiddle tunes hummed under her breath. And slowly, over weeks and months, the sheep began responding not only to rhythm, but to pitch and tempo. A fast reel brought hops. A slow ballad encouraged swaying. A jig produced something dangerously close to skipping in place. Asterisk. The Reverend Brant warned his congregation against farmyard folly and the illusion of beastly intelligence. But even he couldn't explain how, on Christmas Eve, a small group of carollers witnessed Bryony's flock form 2 neat lines and rotate in alternating steps while she sang God Rest the Merry Gentleman in a minor key. Asterisk. Bryony never claimed magic. When asked, she'd shrug. They like music, she'd say. Don't you? She never kept notes, never taught anyone else. But people began coming by her croft just to listen. Not to her voice, which was pleasant but plain. Not to the fiddle, which she never mastered, but to the sound of movement. 12 pairs of hooves tapping, scuffing, shifting in patterns more precise than chance. Asterisk. The Royal Society heard of it in 1744. A junior member named Edward Tillings, with a noted interest in animal cognition, was sent to observe. He spent 2 days at Bryony's Croft, watched 7 demonstrations, took meticulous notes. His conclusion, published in a limited pamphlet. While the phenomenon cannot be classified as dancing in the human sense, the coordinated locomotion of these animals in response to musical stimuli warrants further inquiry. Bryony's response, when shown the paper, was simple. "Bit stiff, isn't it?" Then she taught the sheep to twirl in response to a tin bell. Asterisk. The second year brought strangers. Some came quietly, walking the long rutted road from the valley with shoes caked in moor mud and brows raised in skepticism. Others arrived by carriage, dripping with brass buttons and polite disbelief. They asked questions before they asked names. Bryony rarely answered. She simply pointed to the field, lifted her copper bell, and gave it a single firm shake. Asterisk. What followed wasn't a trick. There were no leashes, no hidden signals. Just sheep playing. Scruffy, dull-eyed sheep moving, as if choreographed by some ghostly barnside instructor. They stepped. They turned. They stopped in unison when the bell fell silent. The watchers didn't know whether to clap or cross themselves. Asterisk. In May of 1745, the Bishop of Ripon sent an envoy, not to investigate the sheep, but the woman. Bryony's behavior leaned dangerously close to the kind of eccentricity that got women whispered about. Too much time alone. Too much fiddling with rhythms and creatures. Too little regard for appearances. But when the envoy, a pale man named Renslow with ink-stained fingers, arrived, Bryony offered him tea, then invited him to sit near the pen. She said nothing. She didn't need to dot as she whistled a low tune. Her sheep began a circular pattern clockwise at first, then reversing, each step placed carefully in mud-worn hollows. Renslow left with a headache, an unused notebook, and the bishop's brow permanently furrowed. Asterisk. There was no profit in it. Bryony accepted no coin, no favors, no offers of apprenticeship. She refused to perform at village events. She wouldn't take her sheep to market festivals. She didn't write down her techniques. When pressed, she said, "They listen because they're listened to." People assumed it was metaphor. It wasn't. Asterisk. By autumn, rumors began to bend. Not just dancing sheep, but talking sheep. Sheep who nodded at the sound of prayers. Sheep who could recognize colors or follow drawn shapes. Bryony never encouraged such stories. But she didn't correct them, either. Instead, she doubled down on the quiet. She began walking with her sheep at dawn, playing a tin pipe that squeaked more than it sang. Her flock followed her like shadows, undistracted by birds or weather. Asterisk. Some said they'd seen the sheep bow. Others claimed to have watched them leap in harmony with tolling church bells. But perhaps the most striking thing wasn't what the sheep did. It was how still they could be. Completely still. As if holding a breath. Asterisk. In early 1746, a philosopher named Eleanor Prynne, who had published essays on animal empathy, arrived unannounced. She watched Bryony work for 6 days, saying little. On the 7th day, she asked, "Do you think they understand you?" Bryony said nothing. Instead, she placed her hand gently on Cullen the ram's shoulder, then hummed a single rising note. Cullen stepped forward, lowered his head, and nudged Bryony's hand back to her chest. Prynne wept, not from sentiment, she later said, but from recognition. Asterisk. No one knew how long the sheep would keep dancing. No one asked what would happen when they didn't. But one day, a child visiting from Massam pointed out that the youngest lamb had begun hopping in triple time. And just like that, something new had entered the rhythm. Asterisk. In the spring of 1747, Bryony fell ill. It wasn't a dramatic sickness. No fever, no wasting, just a slowing down. Her hands trembled more. Her walks became shorter. The sheep, ever watchful, adjusted their pace without being asked. When visitors arrived, they found her seated, not standing. She no longer rang the bell or whistled long tunes. But she still hummed. And still, the sheep danced. Asterisk, they moved slower, now gentler arcs, softer turns. As if the choreography had grown old with its teacher. There was no spectacle. Just the quiet rhythm of 12 animals who had learned over time how to respond to attention. And how to give it. Asterisk, on a mild July morning, Bryony passed away. She was found seated on a stone at the edge of her grazing field, her shawl tucked under one arm, her tin pipe still resting in her lap. The sheep were gathered around her in a loose half-circle. Not moving, not grazing. Just standing. Waiting. Asterisk, there was no will, no family. Only her and the sheep. The villagers debated what to do. A few suggested selling the flock. Others wanted to bring them to the estate of a local baronet interested in performing livestock. But before any decision could be made, the sheep vanished. Asterisk, one evening they were there, 12 of them, lying in their usual spot, heads low. The next morning, the gate was open, the croft was quiet, the field empty. No footprints, no signs of struggle, no fur caught on the fence. Gone. Over the years, sightings were reported. A flock of oddly behaved sheep spotted near Bolton Abbey, moving in tidy lines. 3 ewes in Kettlewell that responded to the sound of church bells by circling the tower. A solitary ram near Hawes who lifted his hooves when a pipe played in the distance. Asterisk, but no proof. No names, just stories like so much else in the Dales. The tale of Bryony Marsh settled into folklore. Told by candlelight, recalled by grandmothers, filed away under odd, but not harmful, until even that faded. Asterisk, in 1821, nearly 80 years after Bryony's death, a traveling musician named Elias Shore found himself stranded by rain in the ruins of an old croft near Cray. He lit a fire, dried his boots, and played a quiet reel on his fiddle, more out of habit than hope. He heard a rustle, then a scrape. From the fog emerged a single sheep, ancient, hunched with a coat like uncombed wool. It stepped forward, paused, then, with one trembling leg, tapped the ground 3 times in rhythm with the music. Asterisk, Elias dropped his bow. He said, "Nothing got anyone for 6 months." Then he wrote to a friend. There was something in the way it looked at me, as though it had heard that tune before. In another life, perhaps, or another pasture. No monument marks Bryony Marsh's grave. No scholar has written her biography. But her legacy endures in quiet corners, in stories, in rhythm. And maybe if you find yourself on a Yorkshire hill at dusk and you happen to hum a tune, just maybe. Something in the mist will tap its foot. Asterisk. The Accountant Who Counted Ghosts, 1892. Krakow, in the autumn of 1892. The accounting office of P. Kowalski and Sons in Krakow recorded an unusual expense. Candles for second shift specters, 8 groszy. No one noticed it at first. It was scribbled between coal delivery and ink refills. But it wasn't a mistake. It was the first quiet signal that Tadeusz Stolarz, senior clerk and man of unswerving precision, had begun counting more than numbers. Asterisk, the building itself was unremarkable, brick-faced, soot-licked, with crooked gutters and a perpetual draft. It sat on Grojka Street, wedged between a shuttered bakery and an apothecary that sold more vinegar than medicine. Tadeusz arrived precisely at 7 a.m. each morning. Never late, never early. His ink blotter was immaculate. His handwriting uniform to the millimeter. He logged every coin, every shipment, every jar of glue used to affix postage stamps. And yet, by November, he had begun allocating line items for things no one could verify. spiritual consultancy, posthumous. Chalk for phantom accounting. Ledger binding, haunted copy, red ribbon only. He never laughed. Never winked. When asked, he simply said, everything must be accounted for. Thaddeus had always been a little peculiar. He refused to use pencils, claimed graphite was too temporary. He dated every receipt twice, once with the Roman calendar, once with the Hebrew, but he was never fanciful. Never superstitious. That's what made the change so jarring. The night porter, a yawning man named Marek, first reported the flickering lights. At 2:13 a.m., 3 nights in a row, candles burned in the front room. But no one was inside. On the 4th night, Marek swore he saw a figure seated at Thaddeus's desk, pale, still, head tilted toward the ledger. When he entered, the room was empty. Only the ledger lay open, and on the page, in Thaddeus's clean script, entry complete. Witnessed by the departed. The office manager demanded an explanation. Thaddeus offered none. Instead, he began submitting expense reports that included stipend for irregular hours, non-living assistance, polishing cloths, for spectral residue, salt for doorway thresholds. He wasn't dismissed. He wasn't reprimanded because his numbers were perfect. Always. 1 December morning. Thaddeus placed a small bell on his desk. Brass. Cracked. He rang it precisely once before beginning his entries. After that, things changed. Ink refused to blot. Clocks ticked out of sync. The building grew colder despite a functioning boiler. Clients complained of dizziness. One junior clerk quit after finding their drawer arranged in alphabetical order by a hand no one admitted using. Still, Thaddeus worked. Logged. He sorted. He balanced columns. And at the bottom of every sheet, he now added a signature, reviewed by TS and others. In January, the auditors arrived. 3 men in stiff wool coats, collars high and eyes sharper than the pens they carried. They were sent from Warsaw, instructed to investigate unauthorized expenditures and suspected ledger tampering. They found nothing out of order. Every invoice matched its receipt. Every expense cross-checked against a manifest. Even the most cryptic entries, marzipan, ghost-shaped, ceremonial use, were balanced to the gross. They left confused, unsatisfied, and according to rumor, with 2 of their fountain pens permanently leaking ink that smelled faintly of sage. Thaddeus never mentioned spirits aloud, but his habits became increasingly peculiar. He began leaving tiny saucers of milk in the stairwell. He insisted on opening the window above his desk precisely 10 minutes before dusk, and he added an entirely new ledger bound in worn green cloth and sealed with black ribbon. This ledger was never seen open, but its spine was labeled post-transactional accounts, ethereal division. Co-workers kept their distance, not out of fear, but out of the slow, spreading sense that Thaddeus was no longer only working for the living. The janitor reported finding the word reconciled chalked onto the windowsill, though no one had access the night before. The paper supplier asked why the office was ordering twice as many ink bottles, and the bell, once rung only at dawn, began sounding again. Each evening, just after the last clerk left. Despite all this, business improved. Late-paying clients settled debts early. One long-missing shipment of Baltic pine planks arrived unannounced, with a note that read, "Delayed, but not forgotten. F." Even the rats left. One secretary commented that the office smelled cleaner. Another swore the air felt watched but kindly. Thaddeus continued. His cheeks grew thinner, his fingernails paler. He wore gloves even indoors, though the heat remained steady. On February 17th, the ink in the office turned silver. Temporarily, just for a day. Thaddeus made no remark, but the entries for that day were flawless. In both ledgers, asterisk the turning point came in March, when a client, Mrs. Helena K. Roll, arrived to dispute a payment. She was elderly, her eyesight poor. She insisted she had paid for a shipment of sugarcane that never arrived. Thaddeus reviewed the records. Calmly, patiently. Then, without a word, he stood, retrieved the green ledger, and placed it still closed on the desk between them. Mrs. Kroll stared. Then she said softly, "Ah, that's where he's gone." She signed the receipt, thanked Thaddeus, left without another word. Asterisk, that was the day staff began referring to the other presence in the office simply as the co-signer. Double quotes, no one saw it. But papers shifted when no one touched them. Dust never collected on Thaddeus's ledgers. At night, the faint scratching of a pen could be heard, even after he had gone. Asterisk, at fiscal year's end, Thaddeus submitted the office's cleanest balance sheet on record. At the COSA bottom, in perfect script, he wrote, "All debts settled. All accounts closed. Attendance complete." He rang the bell once, then left his desk and never returned. Asterisk, Thaddeus Stolars's disappearance caused little alarm. He had no known family. His boarding room above the watchmaker's shop remained tidy, key left beneath the mat. Nothing was missing, save the gloves he always wore and a single ribbon, the black one from the green ledger. His desk remained untouched for 3 days. On the 4th, the office manager approached to clear it. He found the bell polished, the inkwell full, the blotter clean, and the green ledger open to a page no one had seen before. Asterisk, the top was dated simply, March 31st, 1893. Below it, ledger closed. Witnessed by the living and the dead. The ink shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. And then, without wind or hand, the page turned. Asterisk, from that day forward, small oddities became routine. Ink bottles refilled themselves overnight. Misplaced invoices appeared folded neatly atop the radiator. The office cat refused to enter Thaddeus's former corner, but sat just outside it, purring softly. The brass bell remained on the desk. Occasionally, it rang once at midnight. Never twice. Asterisk, the new senior clerk, a skeptical man named Piotr Lewandowski, attempted to reorganize the records. He made it as far as page 2 of the green ledger, before fainting. He later said he felt every unpaid debt in Krakow breathing down his spine. He resigned that week and took up bookkeeping for a silent order of monks in Poznań. No one else touched the green ledger again. In 1895, the ledger vanished. The morning clerks arrived to find it gone. Not stolen, there were no signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no footprints. Just an empty shelf and a slight scent of ink and burnt sage. A chalk line was drawn across the shelf's surface. It read, "No further entries required." Beneath it, in smaller print, "Thank you for your diligence." Signed simply, TSTHE office eventually moved locations. The building on Grojka Street was converted into a tailor shop, then a greengrocer's, and finally a tourist cafe. But strange things continued. Ledgers in the new building never lost pages. Coins misplaced in the till, returned by morning. And once a year, on the last day of March, a bell would ring faintly from the back storeroom, despite no bell being present. Asterisk, in 1932, a young archivist named Zofia Rozusek wrote a paper on anomalous clerical consistency in Krakow's commercial records. She noted that for 47 consecutive years, the accounting office formerly known as P. Kowalski & Sons had filed perfect tax returns with no corrections, penalties, or mathematical errors. When she visited the site of the original building, she was offered a cup of coffee and a strange smile from the shopkeeper, who said, "You've come for the one who never made mistakes." She left Krakow the next day. Her notes were never published. Asterisk, of Thaddeus himself, nothing more was ever found, but clerks tell stories, and every now and then, In old ledgers from across Poland, dusty, yellowed, and forgotten, you may find a final line written in ink, not quite black and not quite dry, all accounted for. No outstanding balance, no initials, no stamp dot, just perfect penmanship. And maybe, if you're very quiet, a faint sound, a bell dot once dot asterisk,